Thank you so much for that introduction, James, and thank you so much for having me here at your AGM. I'm going to read from a number of different books today and share with you some of this year, which involved the pop-up readings around the province and various thoughts about poetry and a life in the literary arts. There are books that stay with you through the doubling of the decades. They take on the quality of an extra limb, always existing at a subliminal level, but allowing you a certain additional reach. I was fortunate enough at the age of 16 to come across immortal poems of the English language, and I've had this for a while, so trust it there in the spine, you can see it. And an anthology found on a rack of other paperbacks in a store somewhere in Ontario. This classic anthology, edited by Oscar Williams, includes a wide range of poetry, chronologically laid out from Middle English up until the 1950s. Last weekend at the Sound Thinking Symposium in Surrey, I chatted with a fellow from Wales who lamented the absence of Dylan Thomas in a lot of contemporary anthologies. And I thought he was wrong. I was like, well, no, I have this anthology. And then I remembered, well, it's the 1950s. But his work is powerful. And this collection penultimately ends with Dylan Thomas. And I wanted to begin with my impression for you. I love voices and I love poetry for the oral quality of it. So I listened and listened again to Dylan Thomas on YouTube. So I'm going to give you a little bit of Fern Hill in my best Dylan Thomas. A little bit of Welsh. And very traditional. Now, as I was young and easy under the apple boughs, about the lilting house, and happy as the grass was green, the night above the dingle starry, time let me hail and climb, golden in the heydays of his eyes. And honoured among wagons I was prince of the apple towns, and once below a time I lordly had the trees and leaves trail with daisies and barley down the rivers of the windfall light. Stanza, 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 the end. Nothing I cared in the lamb-white days that time would take me up to the swallow-thronged loft by the shadow of my hand in the moon that is always rising. Know that riding to sleep I should hear him fly with the high fields and wake to the farm forever fled from the childless land. Oh, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means, time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. And beneath the surface pyrotechnics of assonance and alliteration, there's metaphor deep at work. Time has a body that lets the speaker hail and climb, and later time is something that holds the speaker. And next to metaphor is its much younger brother, simile. Happy as the grass was green, though I sang in my chains like the sea. This book has stayed with me ever since, along the search for metaphors that hold the beautiful mess of this world together. Over the next 20 some odd minutes, I want to talk about metaphor and the muttering or jabbering that precedes and follows it. I'm going to do this mostly by way of reading poems and journal entries from this year, along with readings from various poets and writers. And my talk is called The Metaphorical Circuitry of the Jabbering Soul. But first, jabbering, and we have something very traditional here, and I want to also, thinking about the younger people here, you also want to keep up with the contemporary stuff. Jabbering, I mean, literally, what is jabbering? Well, there is also a tradition, from the early 20th century of sound poetry, and a lot of what I've done this year in my readings has been improvisational, and I've written poems, 10 minutes before a reading, the day before. But today, I thought, for 1 or 2 minutes. So there's kind of a semblance of structure there. And as writers, I mean, we're always taking all sorts of risks. Constantly risking absurdity is how Lawrence Ferlinghetti framed the task of the poet. I'm of the thinking that sometimes we have to dive headlong into that absurdity. And in this jungle of jabbering, we're in search for something new. As we see here in New Westminster, there's no shortage of extraordinarily talented writers with books and people on book tours. In order to stand out, you need to follow Ezra Pound's adage, make it new. At the beginning of this year, I announced that I'd be doing 50 readings from my first book with Anvil Press, Jabbering with Bing Bong, a ridiculous venture. While I had traditional reading venues like Poetic Justice here in New West, Hogan's Alley, an excellent reading series in Vancouver with Timothy Shea, and Planet Earth Poetry, which is in Victoria. And if you ever get a chance, it's a great reading series to check out. I also had to make up venues because there aren't 50 venues in BC to read at where people are going to sit down and listen. So I had to make up venues along the way. Venue number 26 was the Queen of Cowichan, a ferry headed to Nanaimo. And here's the poem, within a poem, that I wrote for and about the occasion. Queen of Cowichan. In the next hour, if I write something you think is pretty good, would it be okay if I did an impromptu 3-minute reading? The bookstore sends me to the chief steward, who recommends the head office, because otherwise this is solicitation. The arbutus sheds its sunset red lightning down the side of the cliff into what wonders of waters. The ferry heads its body of bodies lighting out across the Georgia Strait under what colossal cumulus of ghosts. The passenger weds a text with a tale of crossing midway through life. From what titans of time have we slivered? The youth laugh at the prow in the wind, and from inside the old laugh back at how far they will be blown. What bright-faced falls and newly scarred rises. The arbutus sheds its body of body, lighting a crossing midway through life. What bright-faced falls and newly scarred rises. After reading this poem to the audience of the chief steward, I people-watch my way around the ferry. I sit down behind two who are now nothing but heads and bare feet, resting high on the seats in front, as if, yes, I'm often in the land of as if they had fleshy ears, erroneous antlers. It's morning and they seem clean enough, comfortable, in towing, no line. Some man with hands deep in his pockets smiles or provides his impression of a deflated basketball. A sum of money has been found, is announced for the second time. The old German couple laughs the hardest. One big German who's thunders their conclusion! Listening to different languages that seem kind of nonsensical to us, or the jabbering, we hear thunder, we hear meaning. And clouds, in this poem, as a writer's best friend. They can take on so many different qualities. In this poem, which ponders changes big and small over lives and generations, the clouds are a colossal cumulus of ghosts, the sum of ancestors of all the people on the ferry. The past is often overhead, sheltering us or weighing us down on a rainy day. In Tony Hoagland's Real Sophistication, an amazing book that I recommend highly, his chapter on metaphors is entitled "'Tis Backed Like a Weasel," a reference to an exchange between Polonius and Hamlet, ostensibly about clouds. My lord, the queen would speak with you, and presently. Do you see yonder cloud that's almost in the shape of a camel? By the mass, and 'tis a camel indeed. Methinks it is like a weasel. It is backed like a weasel, or like a whale. Very like a whale. Then I will come to my mother by and by. They fool me to the top of my bent. I will come by and by. I will say so. By and by is easily said. What shapes do we see in the world? Tony Hoagland, on this and on metaphor, writes, Polonius is trying to draw Hamlet's imagination into the consensus of the social web. If only Polonius can get agreement about those clouds, Hamlet can be potentially harnessed into the collective shared agenda. But Hamlet, this subversive figure, that poet, will not cooperate. He continuously changes his images, and by implication shape-shifts himself, moving out of reach. Hamlet's behavior, his insistence on difference, represents the antisocial impulse in metaphor, which people sometimes don't want to hear on a ferry, or in other areas where you try to present a poem.